Welcome to Quarantine Zone, a podcast for HBO's The Last of Us. We are your hosts, Andrew Sorsini,
Dwayne D,
and Tosin Anafawakin.
We just watched the second episode of The Last of Us, titled Infected. We assume you have as well. Total spoilers ahead. Let's dive into the aftertalk. But first, we've got some online spots you can get in contact with us. You can write to us or email us a voice memo at quarantinezonepod@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook now at QZPod. That's our link for both of those. Add us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, all the best podcast networks. And if you do so, please leave us a review. That's how other people get attention about our podcast.
Yeah. Don't forget quarantinezone.deepgeekmedia.com.
Yes, that's our show notes, where our show notes are, and also the episodes are embedded there as well. Okay, so this episode, Infected, is written by Craig Mazin and directed by Neil Druckmann. And Dwayne, before we jump into talking about the episode, why don't you give us a brief recap?
You got it. These recaps are so wonderful because there's only one group of people to follow. Actually, two. So anyway, we have a new cold open. We're back in 2003 in the early days of the fungal outbreak. An Indonesian mycologist, that's someone who studies fungus, is taken in by the military authorities and shown a sample of a fungal infection in a human. The authorities in Jakarta seek her wisdom in stopping the spread, but she tells them they need to bomb the city, knowing that it means everyone she loves will die right alongside her. Back in the now, Joel, Tess, and Ellie are outside of the Boston quarantine zone and headed to the Firefly base, where Joel and Tess are to hand Ellie off to some local Fireflies who will secure Ellie's transit to the west, where a cure could be made. After realizing that their chosen path is blocked by infected and some explanation of the enemy, namely that some infected die after a few months and some live on for years, and that the infected are not only all connected, but the fungus communicates across vast distances via its growth underground, they decide to head to their objective through a museum near the State House. They're attacked by two infected who are wildly deformed from the fungus. They look more like human mushrooms than undead humans. They're separated, but manage to put the two infected out of their misery. We learn that Ellie's been bit, but once again, she shows no sign of infection. They surge her into the rendezvous with the Fireflies, only to find that they killed each other over how to deal with an infected person among their ranks. So the Fireflies are all dead, and there's no one to accept Ellie from Tess and Joel. There's no battery for Joel's car so that he could get to see his brother. Tess then reveals that she was bitten by infected in the museum. One of the infected Fireflies resurrects. They kill him, but his movements activate the underground fungal network, and all of the nearby infected converge in their location. Tess shows Joel that her body is gnarly, while Ellie's shows no sign of infection, proving once again to Joel that Ellie is immune. Tess says a tearful goodbye to Joel, well, as tearful as Tess can get, begging him to save anyone he can. And Joel and Ellie leave the Firefly Fortress. Tess uses gasoline and Firefly ammunition and grenades to explode the fortress, just as the infected overrun the place, killing herself and giving Joel and Ellie a clear path to Bill, their friend with an outpost nearby. And that is the episode. It sounds so simple, but it was so emotional.
Which leads me to ask you, Dwayne, what were your initial impressions of this episode?
I really enjoyed it. I'm trying to be skeptical, but it's difficult. I think they're doing a great job. And I got to say, I played the game.
Yeah.
And when I played the game, I played mostly with a friend. So we'd be sitting next to one another, and, the scares would happen. But also, you die. The character that you're playing dies, and then you come back and you continue. You try to play again. So over time, you kind of get used to the scares. But this reimagining of The Last of Us as a TV show, I'm not playing it. I'm not going over and over and over it again. And so it's scarier than the game somehow. But what's cool is that even though it's different from the game, it seems to have a lot of respect for the game and for the fans of the game who basically made it possible to produce the show. So I got to say, I'm impressed. I didn't want to be impressed because, and you know how I feel about
adaptations,
video game adaptations.
Yeah.
Well, adaptations in general and video game adaptations. But I think they really got something here. What about you, Tosin? How'd you feel?
I really enjoyed this episode. I think we saw another brilliant and killer opener, with a remarkable performance by individuals that we weren't expecting. I love the line "bomb this city and everyone in it," and through the entire rest of the episode, we got to get a greater emotional foundation with Ellie, Joel, and Tess, and kind of see what they're made of, see their moxie and how they view the world through their lens. So this was, the episode moved fairly quickly, but it was also
that whole scene in the museum felt like forever to me.
But it was also slow. So by quickly, I mean we went from scene to scene, destination to destination. But by slow, I mean we got to feel all the character beats and we got to really live in this world. So I thought that was really beautiful, and super excited about what we have to come in the future. Yourself, Andy, what did you think about this episode?
Well, yeah, I have to tell you that I am loving the way that this show is building its world out, is doing all this world building. I was not expecting to see that cold open in Jakarta. At least, I kind of expected that we might get a little bit of it, but I didn't think we were going to get it so soon in episode 2. I thought maybe we might get it fleshed out a little further down the line, but I just absolutely love it because it gives us a little backstory. And for someone who, like myself, has played the game as well, that's not in the game at all. And I feel like when you're playing the game, you don't really need that. All you need to know is that all of this stuff has happened and you're dealing with the fallout of it. But it's great as a viewer, as a passive viewer.
Yeah, when you have a TV show, you kind of have to, like, I love any TV show or movie or even book that makes me wonder what the hell's going on, right?
Yeah.
As long as they've figured out how they're going to reveal it, as opposed to sort of like mystery box it into oblivion. But we know what's going on as people who've touched the game. But the way they're using these cold opens, I mean, I hope this is a formula. I hope that they found a way to have 10 separate cold opens that give us more and more context as time goes on.
Hold on to that thought.
I just want to say one more thing. It's if you've read World War Z, and I mean read it, like read the book.
Oh, sure.
don't watch the movie.
Max Brooks' novel.
Max Brooks, yeah. If you've read World War Z, then that story is presented through a bunch of point of view characters that are relaying the past. Yep. And it's a very effective way of telling the story. And in this case, they're doing that. They have like these characters, like here we have Christine Hakim as Ibu Ratna, and she's just incredible in the expression of emotion she's got going.
That scene, just the interplay between the mycologist and the military general. Yeah. Oh my God, that scene where
he's so he's so disappointed in the answer. Yes. Like a vaccine or something. She's like, you got a bomb city. I need to go home and be with my family.
And just that look on his face when she tells him.
Right. Which is not what you expect. You expect the scientist to say, no, we can save them. You expect the military person to be a hard ass who just wants to, use the most blunt instrument possible. But by flipping that on its head, which is what this show keeps on doing, keeps on flipping things on its head. By flipping it on its head, you feel the direness of this situation, right? So that's the thing. And if they could keep that up, that kind of, and this also thing where you're introduced to a character and the character is no longer around, it just goes to show how good the writing is, that these people can become characters that you care about in short amounts of time, even though you may never see them again in the show. This is all very important. And if you haven't read World War Z, I definitely recommend it. But please don't see the movie. Just, Brad Pitt's fine.
Just
not hating on anybody.
You can see the movie, just realize that it's not. It's as close to it's as close to the source material as iRobot is to the Isaac Asimov source material.
It's farther away, yeah. But yeah, anyway, you were going to say, Andy?
Yes. So outside of that cold open, which is just fantastic, I realized watching the show that there's not a lot of momentum in the body of the show between Joel and Ellie and Tess in the rest of the episode. And I think that reveals the A to B nature of the source narrative, where basically, you know, at the heart of this story, it's essentially a get this character from point A to point B. It's essentially
a straight up escort mission.
Totally. It's Lord of the Rings, but Ellie is the ring, and Joel has to carry her to Mount Doom, which in this case is the Firefly camp out west.
Joel is both Frodo. He's Frodo, he's Sam, and he's Aragorn, all built into one.
Yeah.
He's got the power of Aragorn, the emotional maturity of Sam, and the duty of Frodo, all wrapped up in one character.
Right. So it's
for some reason I thought you were about to pull in Gollum in there as well.
well, you know, I think
maybe Ellie becomes his precious.
Yeah, I think level. Ellie is going to be a little Gollum.
But he doesn't become obsessed with like her and want to consume her.
No.
It should be the opposite of what's going on here.
No, but
I mean, you're right. He does. It's like Lone Wolf and Cub.
Totally.
Lord of the Rings.
Totally.
In post-apocalyptic Massachusetts.
So,
and if you've been to Massachusetts,
yeah,
the whole place is kind of post-apocalyptic already.
Wow.
Ouch.
Wow. Just because you're a Yankees fan doesn't mean...
Apologies to our Massachusetts listeners out there. but then again, I've never been to Massachusetts, so you could be right.
See, you haven't even gone. You haven't even gone to Massachusetts. You just never went, right? It's not even. I bet New York is on your list of places to visit.
Oh yeah, I've been to New York. New York is lovely.
You've been to New York, yeah. But have you been to Massachusetts? Because I spent years in Massachusetts,
No.
and I gotta say.
Oh, wait a minute. What am I saying? Of course, I've been to Massachusetts. I spoke at MIT. Yes.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
That's the only bright spot in the whole place.
Wow.
Cambridge. It's not even Boston. It's Cambridge.
How dare you? Okay, so.
How dare you, Tosin? See?
But
go to Tampa Bay with Tom Brady.
Wow.
So, but people who are watching this show, I have to sort of preface that if you're expecting like a more complex narrative than an escort mission, you might be a little disappointed. So it's kind of a tall order. It's kind of big shoes to fill for the showrunners of the show to add in.
That is the limit of a video game adaptation.
Yes, but I think they're doing a great job of really building out that complexity, building out that depth of character and of narrative than what was in the original, even though the original is fantastic.
Let me just say that when it comes to character, what they've done here in casting Pedro Pascal is allowed a person who can clearly be a leading male in a show, in an action show, no less, but has a certain vulnerability that we haven't seen in a while, right? Like you think about Cary Grant being the leading action man.
Yeah.
He didn't express the kind of vulnerability that Pedro Pascal has expressed across projects, right? Even in Wonder Woman 84, he had vulnerability. Right?
Yes.
And that he was a cartoonish character in that movie. But I guess what I'm saying is I think the complexity isn't going to come in the plot. It's going to come in the performance. It's going to come in how they translate the video game through text and through character and how he delivers that performance. For instance, last episode, the guard, the Fegdra guy has a gun pointed at him. They show you a quick flash of him with his daughter, and then he kills him, or he really beats him up.
Right.
And I don't even think they needed to have that flash, because I think Pascal, if you have been watching the episode and hadn't fallen asleep, I think you saw via the mise en scène, so how they're shooting it, right? How they're blocking it, in addition to the way his face changed. That's the power of acting. His face changed. Mm-hmm. And then he wails on that dude. And I feel like that's really what you need. You need an actor who can pull that off. And I don't always notice that with acting, right? I mean, I'm a fan of shows that have terrible actors. But I noticed that with him because he's able to convey things that don't need to be said, and his face just has it. He just has it, even with the weird gray stuff all over it.
Yep. I think part of the key to that is his cornerstone tragedy, where he's been hardened 20 years by the loss of his daughter, and he's you start off with him being this cold essentially a mercenary, and Ellie's his contact with Ellie is you can see those barriers breaking down. You can see him warming up a little.
But I would say that it's more than that. So the Tess character, extremely powerful in the last 2 episodes. Like, once again, a character that you meet who doesn't make it. But I bring her up because, when you've got a jar, right? You're sitting next to Tosin. You've been working at this jar. Then Tosin grabs the jar. He just opens it right up. And you're like, I softened it up for you, right? I feel like Ellie wouldn't work by herself.
Yeah.
Tess spent however long she was with Joel softening Joel up. And there's one line, and this is what I love about the way they've done this show. I know you couldn't give me everything I wanted. Something like that. I'm paraphrasing what she said.
Yeah.
But it's clear to the audience that she has feelings for Joel that Joel couldn't reciprocate, right? Like, Joel could be her partner in crime. Joel could be her companion in the world. But Ellie first asks, like, are they a couple? And Tess, Tess and Joel are like demure from, they're not into it, right? She asks Joel, like, what's going on? And he's like, I don't want to talk about it.
Pass.
Right. And Tess then sort of confirms that while she wanted more, Joel couldn't give it. Why couldn't he give it? Because this cornerstone tragedy we've been talking about.
Right.
He hasn't opened himself up. He's become a hard ass to survive in a world where he can throw out the dead body of a kid, even though some woman next to him is like, I can't do it. He's like, it's not a problem. I got it. He's closed himself off. But Tess has been working for years to soften him up for her own, reasons. Because selfishly, she wants more with Joel. She likes Joel. I mean, there are also not that many men left, so there's that. But by the time when she's like, save everyone you can to Joel, and Joel has this situation with Ellie, who of course can remind him of his daughter because of her age and because of her gender and all that stuff, then you see how the contribution of Tess isn't just the sort of like, I'm putting her hand in yours, save the cheerleader, save the world.
Yeah.
It's that she helped build this character, right? Joel isn't this rugged individual who comes out of nowhere. He's built by the people around him, by his relationships. And that's where I think this show is more complex than I would imagine it would have been, given that it's a video game adaptation.
I can't say I disagree with you. I'm going to move on to some of the other things I liked about this episode. I really appreciate, and this is a difference between the video game and the show, and I apologize for listeners who are coming in with no foreknowledge of the video game. So you just have to bear with some of this appreciation. But I appreciate that this show the cordyceps spreads through tendrils as opposed to spores, and I feel like that was a super smart move because I think logistically it's impossible to avoid microscopic spores as you would in the game.
You can believe it in a video game, but you can't believe it in a show that's trying to be real life. I think you're right, and I also feel like in this adaptation and in the adaptation of Dune that recently was released back in 2021, they made some changes that just show that screen is a different medium. And that's what makes those adaptations, these two adaptations, so powerful. So in Dune, rather than having characters kind of speak and voiceover as they experience something in the real world, which was a bear, a dog in the first version of the Dune
Clunky.
film. Right, it was terrible. They instead they had them speak in the native Fremen language with subtitles as if they were saying a prayer or talking to God, and that kills it. I mean, in a good way. Like that crushes it. It's awesome because it's authentic to the medium. And in this case, the tendrils are authentic to the medium because not only are they not spores, which kind of don't, spores hang out in air and they kind of float there, but they're not doing anything. Tendrils do things, right? There's this kind of almost like invasion imagery, right? Violation imagery of tendrils. I mean, if anyone's ever been exposed to like terrible Japanese anime, like this idea of tendrils that comes out and they come to get you, right? And it's almost involuntary. That last infected guy goes up to Tess as she's about to blow everything up. And he can't help himself. He opens his mouth, the tendrils come out, and they go into her mouth, and it's just like she's a goner, and
they work so
can't do that with
fast
spores.
too.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean,
frighteningly fast.
Yes, they work fast, but we didn't see Tess turn. We
No.
haven't seen someone turn like that yet, right? Like Tess, they didn't do the thing in The Walking Dead where someone's like over the course of an episode, their face gets wider and wider, and they like start
Right.
like twitching and shit, and then they die and they come back. They didn't do any of that. They let Tess go out with dignity for sure, but also even though like the bite from last episode, the bite up that tall, that high is a couple hours before you turn. She wasn't showing any signs of flipping. She wasn't saying anything like, I feel it now, right?
No,
And there was nothing dramatic like that. They avoided all that, and they were basically like, she's like, I know our luck ran out. I'm going to take her out, that kind of thing, and you had to deal with it. So, but I did love the fact that the tendrils are, when you have the hand hitting the ground, they talked about, and this is one of the things, foundation is important. And I'm sorry to jump around, but foundation is important in any kind of like speculative fiction. And what they did was they put foundation down. You can step on the ground here, and over there, the mycelial network, the fungal network, will call the infected. And in this case,
brilliant. By the way,
the infected person, it's brilliant, right? And I mean, if you've seen Star Trek Discovery, you're like, okay, you're like, that. This is more believable than that. So
also, again, not in the game,
right? Because the tendrils aren't in the game. So they amp the tension. The guy's hand falls down, and the cool thing is he's already infected. So it doesn't matter. Like it makes it even more easy to believe that his infected hand hitting the ground that might have tendrils in it already, communicates. And those people get up and they start moving, and we haven't seen, in the beginning it was kind of like, are these guys the fast 28 Days Later zombies, or are they the slow Walking Dead zombies? But now we know they're like kind of just, their bodies are like people bodies, and they could be forced to move forward.
Right. Their bodies are not. It's the fungus controls their bodies, and the way those background extras like arose from their dormancy was chilling. I mean, just to see them, because the actors they hired, they did some great like kinetic movement of their bodies that felt inhuman. A lot. Did
you notice that when they were all lying down, as the three characters saw all the bodies lying down by that place that they apparently like got, whatever, as the shadows moved across them, they wriggled differently.
Yep. They kind of wriggled in groups in response to the sunlight.
Exactly, which was like, because they can't see, but the sunlight is warm, giving you yet another clue as to how they work. So as they were explaining mycelial network, as they were explaining, they can last for years or they can last for months. We're also seeing that they also react to the sun, react to heat.
Yes,
and that was really big. And their hearing is incredible. And then also we get to see those fungal guys, right? So those two baddies in the museum. Just give you an idea of, okay, so what happens when they last for years, right? They become mushrooms effectively. Like, I mean, it's kind of big.
But it's like you said, more human, more mushroom-like, more human-like mushrooms than mushroom-like humans.
Exactly. And so if they're so bedeviled as to have to last all those years, the fungus takes over. And this is what, like, fungus's whole point is to, like, continue to grow on stuff.
Yes.
To grow everywhere. Yes. To consume everything. Yes. And to kind of expand, right? And so the fact that they, like, these bodies are like a vessel for their expansion is creepy as fuck.
Yes. And speaking of being creepy in general, as a huge fan of Craig Mazin's previous miniseries Chernobyl, I can feel the DNA of Chernobyl all over the show. That opening
in the lighting
scene,
of those opening scenes.
Yes. Well, the bleakness of the show in general, but that opening scene with the professor recommending the best course of action to bomb the city, it felt so reminiscent of the futility of trying to contain the radiation in Chernobyl. And it's something that is like, the way it's presented is in a way that isn't melodramatic. It's it's
just
matter
of fact. That's what makes it so scary.
That's what makes it even scarier, is how matter of fact it is. It's like, oh shit, well, this is a reality, and I'm gonna go home and be with my family.
It reminded me of when I was watching James Cameron's Titanic for the first time.
Oh no!
And
why'd you do that?
The captain was like, or one of the engineers of the captain was like, it's a question of mathematics. It's gonna sink. And that to me was far more dreadful than Billy Zane shooting at Leonardo DiCaprio across the ship as it sank. Right. This idea that like it's going to sink.
Yeah.
This is going to happen. And now you have to like live whatever time you have left knowing this is going to happen. Right. And that's just freaky.
And I have to say also, I just love one of my favorite moments in this episode where, them offering Ellie some food, and she's like, "Oh no, they packed me a sandwich," and she pulls out this deluxe chicken sandwich that looks like it freshly made off of a deli counter, and meanwhile Joel and Tess are like sadly eating like
homemade jerky,
dried out jerky. It was comic.
She's like, they get them from smugglers. Aren't you guys smugglers? These guys are better than you are.
Yeah, I thought that was actually a pretty adept way of also pulling in the line where she asks for a gun and then like jokingly says, "Well, I'll just throw my chicken sandwich at because when you because the gun line is something that she also asks for in the game.
Yeah, and
you just kind of roll with it, right? Because you're already as the character, as the player, you're busy doing other things, so it's kind of a sidebar, and it does, there's more that comes out of that, but it would seem like it's less of a throwaway in this case because it's part of the actual scene, and it just works really well in both a comical beat but also a sort of nod to the game itself. And speaking of nods to the game, there's quite a lot of that in this episode, which is like really nice to see. We already talked a little bit about how they're driving to Mount Doom and sort of a single journey, but you also see that in the pathing of the of where the characters actually roam and move and how they move about, right? So you it's really like video game pathing, where even you have like in the museum, one of the doors gets blocked, which always happens in video games. You go through a door, you can't come back.
My kid pointed that I don't think that's in the that event isn't in the game, but I thought it was hilarious how much it felt like a video game. Like as soon as they walk through the door of the hallway in the museum, the whole entry collapses behind them, and now they're trapped.
Yeah.
Yep, and then the side doors are locked.
It's a movie thing
right?
too, though, because in a lot of movies they do that. Like in Lord of the Rings, for instance, they're going down the bridge of Khazad-dûm, and then they find the stairs, and like, those stairs have been there forever. But suddenly, when this dwarf and this like man and this elf are on it, the stairs like collapse. That's just one of those things where you can't go back that way, which kind of answers a question for like close watchers, like how come you guys just don't go back? Because they cut it off.
Yeah, and so I think earlier, or it might have been a later scene where they try both the side doors, which are locked, and it's like, oh, well, we've got to crawl through this area and move forward that way, and it's like it's all very sort of video game-esque. I loved all the other references that they had. I think they were mainly subtle touches that were kind of beautifully done. You had Joel with his bag of holding, where he keeps all the goodies to repair wounds and all the pills.
And he was a contractor, so that helps you understand that he is handy.
Yep.
Yeah.
You have. Go ahead.
Before you jump into all that stuff, I just want to you mentioned these video game things, and I wanted to say one thing that really, really stuck out to me.
Yeah.
In a video game, it could be Quake, it could be The Last of Us, it could be whatever, Mario Brothers. You're running, and you can run forever. As long as your fingers can push a button, the character can do the running, right? The character can do the crouching. The character can do the belly crawl or whatever. Your character doesn't really tire. So when they go up the 10 flights of stairs, and they're like, oh, pooped. And I was like, that wasn't that bad. They're like, well, you don't have the knees we have.
Yeah.
And that does the same thing that the original, that the early Cold Open did. It connects the world that you're seeing there with our world. Like I can be with my godson or my own son, and they seem to have an unlimited ability to do things that just make me sore the next day, right? I'm skiing or something, and I'm like, oh, the next day I'm like, oh, I'm a little sore. And they're like, I'm fine, whatever. Because that's just not how young bodies work. And these bodies, Joel and Tess, are not young bodies. They're straight up middle-aged bodies. And that's not what you see in video games. It's not what you're doing Tomb Raider or Prince of Persia, and you're just swinging from vines all day long, and that's just not how it is when you actually have to swing from a vine. So that really just connected it for me, like just made it feel, again, you talk about world building, Andy, made it feel more real. So before we got away from the whole video game thing versus other things, I just wanted to pop that in, Tosin.
Yeah, so other things I noticed, we've got the hotel and the piano, which make an appearance in the game. It's a good set piece. However, Joel is the one who's tapping the piano, rather in this case it's birds. You actually see that, in this world there is wildlife that's still thriving and available, and which is a really nice touch.
Not every mammal has been affected.
There, I'm just going to jump in right there because one of my notes was that Ellie's like, hey, how come it's not all infested out here, right? And they're like, well, it's not really like that. Like, there are infected, obviously, but it's not really like that. And what we see is, you can go back to Chernobyl, you can go back to anything. Nature has reasserted itself in a world that man has left. And if you look at, you can get on YouTube, you can look around. Basically, a lot of our infrastructure, our whole problem is that nature wants to reassert itself, right? And so seeing when they woke up in that building and there's greenery everywhere inside the building, nature coming up over 20 years through the concrete slab on the floor, whatever, and hearing the birds, tweet, and then the ducks flattle. They're making their way. Like life will survive. Right. Humanity may not survive, but life is going to do its own thing. What I also thought was cool from the whole nature coming back was inside that, wherever they were, warehouse, store, whatever, when they woke up and Ellie was eating her sandwich, it looked like moss, like a growth was happening in the building, right? Like an unwanted growth was happening in the building, which kind of just again reminds you that you've got this this situation with the fungus,
Yeah.
So that was pretty good.
Yeah.
Sorry, Joe.
No, and we also see Joel with one of the things that people make a lot of fun of the game, if you take a look around, is you spend a ton of time in the game crouching around to try and move silently.
Oh, sure.
And Joel finally does his first crab walk of the mission, so I found that funny. And then finally, the wooden plank. So in the game, you end up moving a plank around in many occasions to cross
ladders,
surfaces. Yeah, you actually have one, so they pulled it out, and luckily he didn't have to move any of the plank or the piano, but it all just worked, and it worked in a nice subtle way. So
and
how
really cool is it references. And how cool is it that Ellie was like, if I asked you to walk across two rooftops on a wooden plank that bends and bows, I think most of you would be like, ooh, okay, maybe I'm gonna crawl across it. I don't want to lose my balance. Ellie's like, after what we just went through, this is cake. And that to me felt real. What I did have a question. Tess just twisted her ankle or sprained it or whatever, and she seemed to make it across off camera with no problem. Right? I almost thought that she was gonna not go forward because she couldn't make it or something. Because I didn't know what they were gonna do with her. But it's it was really interesting to see that.
There was she did have quite the grimace when she was trying to go down the ladder. Yeah. So that was shown there. The thing about Ellie, which I found really fascinating in this episode, is that she's really us, the audience. She was asking all the questions that the audience.
Yeah, she's the explainer thing.
And
she's Luke in the first Star Wars movie.
Yeah, Joel was explaining why they needed to be quiet. Just anything that needed that sort of additional dimension that you don't necessarily see in a video game. They're able to place that through the eyes of Ellie. Right. And I think the other thing that the showrunners did a really good job with here is, in the game there's no additional bite. We're just led to believe that this one bite, is the case, and that she's actually safe because she's been able to last many days.
Yeah.
But this is a way of kind of showing that direct correlation to the audience that, hey, Ellie got bit before at the same time as Tess, and she's still like thriving. She's still living. So it really
her bite is just a cut, and Tess is a complete infected, goopy mess, which just allows us to see Joel have to, Joel's like suspicion was that wasn't the case, and now he has to recognize that it is the case.
Yeah, yes. And it really sort of grounds the audience in the rules of this game, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can no longer not be a believer. You've seen with your own two eyes the difference between these characters. So I thought that was really sort of telling.
Yeah, I love the rules, like the way that he explained the difference between quiet and silent. They can't see us, but they can hear us. I mean, rules are good. In The Walking Dead, they've got rules.
Yeah.
In Zombieland, one of the rules is keep your seatbelt on, always wear your seatbelt.
Wait, do they actually have rules in The Walking Dead? Maybe in the first 2 seasons? Do they still?
Well,
yeah, I mean,
like metaphorically speaking,
the
not
rules are exactly.
Not literally the character saying these are the rules, but these episodes, like these first couple of episodes in they're establishing the rules of this world on a narrative sense.
Exactly. So in The Walking Dead, you find out pretty soon that everyone who dies becomes a zombie. It doesn't matter if you get bit by a zombie or you die in your sleep. Right. So they go over that. Right. It's airborne. That's part of the rules of The Walking Dead. In The Walking Dead, you realize that there's zombies that are just sitting on the floor, and they'll grab you and bite you. There's zombies that are roamers. There's zombies that are walkers. They have different types of zombies. And this is, they describe it a bit more in the comic book, but it's certainly there in the show. So the layout of the rules through Ellie and her lack of understanding, Ellie is a very necessary character for that. Again, just like Luke having to learn how the Force works through Obi-Wan in the first Star Wars film. Right. That's you need that kind of explainer character. Sure. And I feel like Ellie is doing that well. But she throws some things in her head. Like they're like, are someone going to come after you, like parents or a boyfriend? And if you're familiar with the video game, you know why a boyfriend isn't coming after her. So when she says, I'm an orphan, but as for a boyfriend, nope. You're like, of course, nope, right? So that's a thing. I don't want to spoil why a boyfriend wouldn't be coming after Ellie, but it was a good nod to the game. So
you got something note in your notes here, Dwayne, that I want to touch on because I think it's really interesting, and I hadn't actually picked up on it. But now that you've written it down here, I'm like, oh yeah, about Joel explaining that he's got a hairline fracture.
Yes, it's good foundation. It's like Andy. I remember years and years ago you explained to me what Chekhov's gun was. When you see that gun in the first act, you're going to see it again in the third, right? And so Joel's hand shakes, hairline fracture. It does two things. It throws us off from wondering if, Anna Torv's character, Tess, is going to get hurt. You're worried about Joel and how he's hurt. But then Joel seems to handle himself okay when they're doing all the fighting. But when he's fighting those zombies, you're like, he's got a hairline fracture. Is that going to mean he's too weak to fight them off? What's going to happen? So it does that. But it also means that in the future, that fracture is going to it might show up as a weakness. And then also, did he get that from just beating the soldier in the first episode? Because again, in a video game, you can punch somebody all you want, Grand Theft Auto. But in real life, if you really bring your fist against someone's skull, your fist is, unless you're trained, your fist is not going to walk away from that unscathed. You know what I mean?
Yes, but for me, there's more than just there's actually a subtext here that
go for it.
So Joel is a man who has been hardened by 20 years of coldness, and he's built this wall up between him and emotional depth, emotional expression. So here he's saying that he's got a hairline fracture, but it's also, I feel like he's metaphorically speaking that that wall that he's built between him and the real world, between him and caring for another person, in a parental sense, there's a hairline fracture there as well.
An opening.
Mm-hmm. There's an opening that's going to get.
Wow, that is deep, man.
Right?
I love that. I love that. That's the kind of shit that Tosin brings up.
Well, speaking of Joel and sort of that opening,
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys noticed this, but when Ellie is looking at in the distance before she's about to go down the ladder, she notices the Capitol and comments on how beautiful everything looks.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you noticed, Joel looks at her. The camera positions at the back of Ellie, her hair, and then he takes a quick glance at his watch as she's going down. And that shows a little bit of that same sort of fracture, right? Where that sort of emotional,
the kind of thing his daughter might say.
Yeah, that he's kind of starting to feel that attachment, but then he also, as he reflects on his watch, I think he also realizes that the world is still a broken place, and for him, time is still stopped. So, I mean,
there's a lot going on.
It's also important to recognize that Ellie is 14, which is about the age that his daughter was when she died, right?
Yep.
But it's 20 years later, so she would have been 34 at this time.
Yeah.
So every time he's interacting with Ellie, it's taking him back to his own youth when his daughter was 14, and that is something that he gets reminded of who he was. I think that's an important fact in him taking care of Ellie. He's not just the Joel that he is today, the hardened super Joel. Times were simpler. He was a more caring person because he was just a contractor working with his brother, trying to make ends meet. And Ellie can remind him of that simpler time, even without her knowing it or without trying. So there's a lot. And this is what I'm talking about, guys. The characterization of Joel is so powerful.
Yes.
In the way they've done these two episodes, that it's just like, you don't get to see men in action shows that have these layers that often. So just savor it.
Yes, Pedro Pascal is killing it.
Yeah,
and as a grown up, feeling emotions as a guy and not feeling like you're not guy enough, must man harder. That's not coming up with him. Like, there's no question of his his masculinity when he's showing emotions, and he doesn't have to show all of his emotions through anger. He shows them through doubt and other things, and that is a difficult thing to convey on screen. So I don't know. I can't get over that. I'm excited.
Yeah, and I think Ellie as a character is also having those similar sort of struggles too, where she is observing the wonders of the world, right? This is what a hotel is. This is what the other things is. This is what that Capitol looks like in the distance. And the beauty of this world that she's never been exposed to. She notes the beauty of the Capitol in the distance as she gets closer. But as soon as she gets within these places, she, in the hotel, she notices like a dead human. In the Capitol, there's, that beauty is contrasted with the destruction, the death of Tess, the violence, and the internal consumption and consuming of, not just the infected, but
the walls are covered with fungus and the buildings are falling apart.
The walls are covered, but also humans who, have disagreements, humans who can't get along, right? Humans who, whose decision making has been sort of corrupted. And so it's really poignant when you see her after Tess has exploded the building, how the camera focuses on her as she looks at the building and looks back, and kind of you can feel that internal sigh, that internal, well, this is what the world is, right? That beauty is more. That beauty is, as this episode is titled, infected.
Yeah, it's tempered with beauty is tempered with death, basically.
Yep.
And
you still have to move on, right?
And
you still have to pick up her pack and follow.
You still have to save what you can, as Tess put it.
Who you can
save
save,
who you can
right?
save.
Although, really, she didn't grab a grenade. She had to try and do this whole lighting thing.
It was covered with. I mean,
come on. She opened a box of grenades. They all on the floor. Just pick one up, pull the pin, and just hold it as long as you can.
I'm okay with her not thinking straight.
It's true. Any other story points that you want to bring up before we get into technical aspects?
I liked when Pedro, when Joel was like, "This isn't going to end well, Tess. We need to go back." And Tess is like,
"Yeah,
no, we're going to go forward." And then Tess ends up dead.
Like, Tess is like, this is where I'm going to stay.
Yeah.
Right.
I did enjoy the bombing of the city. I know, Andy, we talked about how this does actually come up briefly in the game itself.
Right.
But it was good for them to actually call it out that, hey, the scientists said bomb cities.
Yes.
And they bombed. Well, I mean, the military. Yeah.
Yeah, they actually followed through in some places and it worked to a certain extent. Yeah, so something else that was very interesting to me is the visuals from a kind of as we delve into more of the technical aspects.
Yeah.
At first, when I first saw the characters on screen and so my background, it felt a little like the volume. It's like the characters were juxtaposed on the background of it all, but while the background looked beautiful, it just couldn't really feel.
They didn't feel like they were in it.
Yeah. Now, when they transition to the next scenes, and they were actually walking and moving and feeling and touching, that felt more like, hey, we're
real.
In this environment. We're there. We're moving forward. So I think
that's just the difference between the PS3 Last of Us and the PS5 Last of Us.
That's a good way of putting it.
I think that as long as we're talking about technical aspects here, I think that the production design here was absolutely staggering. Like, I was so impressed by everything. I didn't quite feel the sort of them being in like an artificial volume that you felt, Tosin. Like, I felt it was pretty much like on par. I was just, my jaw had dropped while they're walking through these exterior environments, and you're seeing the level of detail of the detritus in the background is just so lush, and it felt like there's so much post-production work, lovingly,
and just set production too.
And set production too. I'm not sure. For me, it was very difficult to tell like where the on-camera set production ended and where the post-production backgrounds started.
Like where the practical ended and the digital started. Yeah,
exactly.
Same. I've watched a lot of like animation in my time, and in animation, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles walk into a room and the room is spotless. Right.
Yeah.
And so that really informs when I'm like looking at live action stuff, and it did really feel as if there's like you said, detritus. They have to step over things, whatever. These buildings that they built as sets, this idea that like the floors were perfectly dusty. When they had to walk into the hotel lobby, it was disgusting, right? It was absolutely disgusting. And in any other zombie flick, there would have been some bloated, gross zombie rising from the stuff and reaching out. It would have been like, it's so gross, whatever. But they held the scare.
Yeah.
And that was great too. But yeah, it did. The practical sets felt very real. That last set with the gasoline going across the floor. Yeah. And the grenades, all of that was just very serious. But obviously, when the explosion happened, you're like, okay, that's CGI. But with these effects being so real when they're in like intimate moments. Mm-hmm. It offsets those digital things that you would otherwise know. But yeah, I just feel like the suspension of disbelief is pretty good all around.
I really enjoyed the wiggling of the characters, or the sort of pulsing of the characters that they showed.
Yeah.
Looking down, mm-hmm. It's just I think the swarm is just like really well done.
Really well done.
Incredibly well done. So,
speaking of acting, I want to bring up once again what a great job I think Bella Ramsey is doing as Ellie. She's creating this smarmy teen character who's clearly had to grow up in a tougher environment than pre-infection kids. You see her attitude in contrast to Sarah, Joel's daughter, and it's like 180 degrees different.
Right.
And I feel
it's not you can't say Sarah didn't have a care in the world, but her cares were more in keeping with what we think of a 14-year-old. Whereas Bella Ramsey's Ellie is just, she's a bit more badass. She's not quite Lyanna Mormont, but she's
right.
She's badass.
Right.
I will say though that with all this acting talking, I got to give it to both Christine Hakim as Ibu Ratna in that first cold open,
the Jakartan mycologist.
Yes, the Jakartan mycologist, and of course Anna Torv. I think the last 2 episodes she's been the Rock.
Oh yeah,
Anna Torv is
really bringing above and beyond what the source material character had. I mean, Tess in the video game is great, but a little one note. But man, Anna Torv, she really.
You
brings
almost
the
thought
dimension.
she was going to make it a little bit longer.
Yeah.
But that's what the show does to you.
Yeah, I suspect, going back to Bella Ramsey, I suspect that I feel like that Bella Ramsey is painting a darker Ellie and potentially a more sadistic Ellie than in the game. In the game, Ellie, I feel like Ellie, you don't see the.
She's kind of just scared, and she's working with doing the situation.
Yeah, and she sort of takes on the daughter role. She sort of folds into that daughter role under Joel, and I feel like this Ellie, Bella Ramsey's Ellie, is pushing a little bit harder, and is potentially a little darker. We'll see as the show goes on.
I mean, that's kind of the realness of it, right? That goes back to the whole. The X-Men don't wear yellow in the first X-Men movie because it would be too cheesy. So she's, they've gone a little Dark Knight with her. They've gone a little bit, what are kids like? How do they push back against authority?
Yeah.
Even in the beginning when she's being kind of like moved over to the Joel and Tess thing from the Marlene thing, she's like, I really.
Yeah.
Like after all the time I've spent establishing that I'm okay to you, you're just gonna like toss me off to these people,
I had this whole section planned about this theory that I had read on Reddit that it just completely got nullified by the cold open of this episode. But essentially, there was a user on Reddit. Adagnost, who theorized that the initial cordyceps outbreak was spread by contaminated flour, which we have now confirmed by this episode. But their points of proof was that in the first episode, Sarah doesn't have any flour for the pancakes, so they make eggs instead. Both Sarah and Joel refuse the biscuits that are offered by the neighbor. Joel says he's on the Atkins diet, which is similar to keto with no carbs. Sarah doesn't take any of the cookies because of the raisins. Joel forgets to get a birthday cake. There are all of these little points that seem innocuous when you watch it, but when you go back realizing that it was the infection was passed through flour, you're like, oh, this is why Sarah and Joel lasted as long as they did.
Why they weren't at least caught up in the initial situation.
Right.
And it could be that flour, that flour that was work at the factory.
Yeah,
it might have never gotten out. It might have never been distributed because the contaminated flour contaminated the people, and if it went through your nose, you only have 2 hours before you whoop. So it's unclear that it got out, but it is clever looking back that they were able to kind of get around all that.
Yeah.
It just happens that the world's largest flour mill is in Jakarta. And it's where we know the first outbreak happens on the radio while Joel, Sarah, and Tommy are eating breakfast. That's from, real steamed ham on Reddit. So,
yes. All right, let's talk about some ephemera. These are links and extra textual connections that'll help enhance the enjoyment of this episode. I have linked in our show notes a video about the Wood Wide Web, and that is the real-life fungal network that exists beneath the earth and connects trees and shares this communication network with trees and other living plants.
Like an avatar.
Yes,
No, not like
exactly
that. Ugh.
the world tree. Yes,
Just take your hair, your tangles, and they just connect it to the other guy's tangles, and then you can communicate. So you can fly a beast.
yes. So that's a real thing, and I love that they brought that into this the world of this show. And so there's a video on there, sort of explaining the science behind that.
Yeah, I mean, we learned about aspen groves here in Colorado, and there's like an aspen grove where the roots are connected across miles and miles and miles, and they're not just connected; they're connected such that if one part of the aspen grove has access to some nutrients and another part doesn't, they can theoretically suck it in their roots and pass it along with like relatively minimal loss, significant loss, but relatively minimal loss. To the parts of the aspen grove that are looking for that particular nutrient or mineral. So, yeah, it's not a small thing. It's a real thing. By some measures, the largest organism in the world is the aspen grove.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah.
And Tosin, you brought up a slide from a Andreessen Horowitz deck that showed all of these games that are being adapted to TV series, and I just wanted to talk about that for a moment. We've got Halo over at Paramount Plus, which I've seen, was not impressed with it. And HBO Max, of course, has The Last of Us, but there's a lot of stuff currently and in the works that are being developed across Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, AMC, and Peacock, and other places. And
among them is The Witcher, which to me is like, I've seen The Witcher. I've fallen asleep during The Witcher. I recognize that fans of The Witcher are big fans of the show, but I'm not convinced that it's a great video game adaptation.
Right.
Whereas having seen The Last of Us, I find myself incredibly excited to see BioShock.
Yes. Well, of the titles that are mentioned here on this slide, which is going to be, I'll have that embedded in our show notes. BioShock is the one that excites me the most out of all of these properties because,
you're on the same page as I am.
Yes, like The Last of Us, I think it's the one with the most narrative depth and the most. It's the one that moved me emotionally more than any other property here, other than
you were balling. You were balling.
Well, BioShock,
BAWLING, balling.
Specifically, not just BioShock, but BioShock Infinite, which I think is like a much better entry in the franchise than any previous entry.
Right.
So
now,
I'm excited.
Which
one might be Disco Elysium.
Okay.
I think that was and right now that seems it's in development by other is what the categorization is. Now, once again, who knows if these things will actually make their way out, but it's good. It's fun to theorize. So I think that one could be very solid.
Life is Strange also has some
can we go everyone rank their top three and then mention and then hold on to your absolute worst so we can share those separately. But okay, Andy, so your top three.
My top three out of the ones that have yet to be developed here, I am going to say BioShock, if they do BioShock Infinite and not just the OG BioShock, God of War, and I'm going to say Life is Strange is the third one.
All right, Tosin, how about you?
Yeah, I'd say Disco Elysium. I'm sure, but like BioShock is on that list for me as well too. And the third on that one, it's hard to say, but it might actually be. It's either Splinter Cell or Gears of War. I'm leaning towards Splinter Cell because I do like the sort of Tom Clancy things that we've been getting of late.
And why isn't that on Prime, right?
The
rest of the Tom Clancy stuff.
Yeah, that actually would be interesting right there.
For me, I got to say BioShock. That's first and foremost. But I also feel like Mass Effect could be pretty epic.
You've always been a Mass Effect fan.
Yeah, I haven't been able to play it as much as I wanted, but I think it's got a good space opera feel.
Sure.
I do like Mass Effect. The only reason I didn't put it is two reasons. Twofold. One,
so many of them.
I'm captain and I approve of this message. Has to be played in there. But two, it was just like there's so many. It's. I guess as long as they use the world, because there's just so many side missions, so many.
Sure.
Like
Sure.
I'm the type of person who 100% completed Mass Effect games, and there's not very
Wow.
many series that I do that with. So I did all the side missions,
Wow.
and after seeing all those, I can easily imagine a screenwriter being lost in this world and not doing it justice.
Getting foundationed.
Yeah, not putting enough foundation, putting too much in the spare parts rather than the sort of main storyline.
Aren't those the
But anyway.
games where you can take your character from a previous game, bring it into the next entry in the game, and it will remember your choices from the previous entry?
Yes.
Yeah.
To a certain
It's
extent,
ingenious.
yes.
Yeah, to a certain extent, yeah. So I would say Mass Effect. And then, I kind of, with Mass Effects, it's kind of either or with the following. If they want to do Warhammer 40,000,
That's coming.
that would be, yeah, it looks like it's in the Prime Video section. That would be incredible because it is like the most ridiculous Game of Thronesy space opera you can imagine. It came out before Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
The actual game, like the tabletop game. And Warhammer was a tabletop game in addition to being a video game. So that could be wild. But also it's so massive and so big, like Mass Effect, that it also could be a gigantic mess.
Yeah.
So
You got to have a solid
interested.
narrative for me, which is why
Exactly.
the choices that I made, I feel like I'm happy with if they do those well.
So I agree with what you're saying, which is why my lowest and most hated choice over here is Exploding Kittens.
I
What
love
on
Exploding Kittens.
You
I
think
love
Exploding
that
Kittens,
game.
The show is going to be any better than Angry Birds, the show.
That is a fun card game.
Okay, so what's your least favorite now that I've said Exploding Kittens is mine?
Oh, well, if you're talking about one that I'm like least interested in, the one that's like, I don't know. There's a lot of them that I feel like I'm not sure how much they can add. Like Sonic the Hedgehog, it's a
We
side
already have the
scroller.
films, like-
We have the films, but I mean, what more can you do with that? But I feel like those kind of games are geared are aimed at an audience that's not looking for narrative depth.
Yeah. There've been plenty of Sonic the Hedgehog TV series
For
that
sure.
I've definitely watched as a kid. So it's probably just more of that. For me,
I know you want to see Tomb Raider again.
no. Well, actually, depends. The last Tomb Raider movie was good. If it's, I do like the most recent iteration of the Tomb Raider games, and so that would be great. It's some of these are kind of hard to imagine. Like Devil May Cry is just so over the top that it's like,
Yeah, but look what they've done with Castlevania.
yeah. But Castlevania's, I guess, okay.
It's anime
If
though.
it's
Anime is
yeah.
much easier to pull from a video game that's
Yeah,
animated.
if we keep animation on the table, then maybe it's League of Legends. Well, so they have that.
Yeah. Arcane is League of Legends,
Arcane
and
was
that's great.
Yeah, I guess. Maybe I keep like going around all of them. Maybe then it is like. I should say Halo because it's already out, but no, maybe it is Twisted Metal because that was just never a property I was into. So
Right.
Yeah.
I know there are a lot of people who are huge fans of Twisted Metal, but just never a property I was.
They should make a game. They should make a TV series. Remember all those mech games that used to come out?
I love Mech Warrior soundtrack.
The soundtrack is good, but it'd be a terrible game, right? It'd be the worst. So there's that. Anyway, that's where we are.
Yeah. So that's going to do it for this episode of Quarantine Zone. I'm going to go around the table and ask, starting with you, Dwayne, where can people find your work on the internet when you're not talking about The Last of Us?
Check me out on Twitter, twitter.com/DwayneD. Tosin, what about you?
You can catch me at Twitter at Toast4321. What about yourself, Andy?
You can find me at Twitter at Mr. Babyman, and of course find our show at QZPod. And once again, I want to encourage people to like and review our podcast episodes on all of your podcast networks. Join us next week when we cover the third episode of The Last of Us. And until then, write us an email, tweet us, drop a comment on iTunes, do all of that. We'd love to hear from you, and we will see you guys next week.
See you next week. I don't consider chocolate candy. I have a hard line.
Oh, really?
Candy ends at chocolate, yeah. Chocolate is not candy. Chocolate grows. Candy does not.
For me, candy is a catch-all for any sweet confection.
That's different. You can have you can go to a bakery. You're gonna call that. It's literally a confection.
Let me rephrase that. Any small sweet confectionery snack.
I don't like it. We're gonna have to work on that definition.
Okay.
Guys on the West Coast playing fast and loose.
We'll have to schedule that discussion for our culinary podcast.